everyone. I'm April Villarreal, and I will be talking to you about muted group theory today, which is chapter 36 in the book. Now, to start off with, muted group theory is the idea where certain groups, mainly minorities, who were first labeled by the original theorists to belong to the lower power group. Now, there's the higher power group and there's the lower power group. The higher power group is actually acknowledged by society. Their words, their phrases, their ideas, whatever you can think of were acknowledged by society. Now, when you refer to the lower power groups, they weren't actually acknowledged. Now, this is where minority and women come into play. As many of us know, women did not have a voice until it came to women's rights. And the same for minorities until they chose to express their rights. Now, they were sanctioned into the lower power groups because back then they weren't exactly acknowledged by society. Their words, their ideas weren't actually taken into consideration. And even if they were taken into consideration, it was often found that any idea that they had to rephrase it. They had to reword it. They had to change the language that they originally created it in. Now, what I mean by language, I'm not saying that they created it in Russian and they had to translate into English. No. They had to change the way it was worded. They had to be very particular with the vocabulary they used, and as well the way it was presented. That took a lot. And even though sometimes they made the effort to go into the elaboration of changing everything and being very careful with vocabulary and wording, sometimes society just didn't want to hear it. Now, personally, that really sucks because they chose to make the effort to change. Now, I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but if you can work hard enough to change the vocabulary, you feel that it should actually be heard. Back then, it wouldn't have been heard at all. Now, that's what they went through as a minority, as the lower power group. The original theorists, when it came to the muted group theory, are Mr. Edwin Ardener, Shirley Ardener, Cherish Cremray, and Mark P. Orb. Now, they are mentioned because they chose to elaborate more. They chose their own sections and they chose to spread. They chose to broaden the actual research. They chose to take their own sections or they chose to take their own angles. Like with Cherish, she's taken the angle of women. She chose that particular one because she wanted to elaborate how women were considered a minority. She wanted to elaborate on whatever they went through, on everything, the wording, the changing, anything that society wasn't accepting. She went through it. She decided to elaborate on her research. She decided to go through it completely. Now, an example I have of muted group theory refers to an article that I read, and it is titled Employee Mistreatment and Muted Voices in the Culturally Diverse Workplace. Muted group theory is the critical theory, and it is concerned with power and how it is used against people. While critical theories can separate the powerful and the powerless many numbers of ways, the theory chooses to use a different type of spectrum when it comes to men and women. This is what the article touches on. It touches on how you go from having a voice to not having a voice after something happens. Now, often that happens in the workplace. We've all experienced it at some point. Something happens and we don't feel safe enough to say that. That's when we become a muted group. That's when we lose our voice. That's when we really feel that we cannot say anything. Now, the article touches more because it goes into culturally diverse workplaces. When you're a minority working in a very dominant area, let's say it's a company that's a majority white and you're minority, right? Something happens and we're not exactly allowed to say anything. Or not exactly allowed. We feel we're not allowed to say anything because we don't know what's going to happen. Since it's primarily majority white, we don't know if as a minority we'll be kicked out or if we'll actually be acknowledged. It's a 50-50 shot. We don't know how it's going to be handled. Now, the article touches more based on how minority workers lose their voice. They lose their voice because they're afraid. Now that's the primary thing. We become a muted group out of fear. We don't become a muted group because we choose to stay quiet because, I don't want to do it. No, they chose to stay quiet because they don't know the outcome. It's unpredictable in a workplace. Now, a lot of us have probably went through that at one point or another, and at some point you became that part of the muted group until you chose to express yourself. And it's important to express yourselves, and it's important to tell people to express themselves as well. Now, I hope you learned a little bit about the chapter, or a lot about the chapter, and I hope you look into that article because it's actually very informative, and it'll show you that, hey, I may have become a muted group and I may not have known it, but it allows you to make a difference when it comes to you, your workplace, and hopefully the chapter allows you to elaborate more on that as well. Thank you.